Before Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, she was, of course, a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2008, as well as being a senator from the great state of New York. Hillary Clinton was, in fact, a very popular senator from the state of New York. As she left office, she had an approval rating of 70%. Hillary Clinton's success as a senator in New York was attributed not just to her name recognition, not just to her overall skills as a politician, but also to the fairly atypical for a Democrat focus that she had on the more conservative areas of her state, the geographically larger, politically much less influential conservative parts of New York State. As many fundraisers and events as she held in New York City, Hillary Clinton, as a candidate for the Senate and later as a senator, could just as often be found in the rural, more conservative counties that are collectively known as upstate New York, even if they aren't all up. And while all of that helped Hillary Clinton on Election Day, in a district like New York's 26th district, for example, even a runaway New York politics hit like Hillary Clinton could not overcome that district's demographics. In Hillary Clinton's Senate run in New York, she lost every single county in New York 26 to her Republican opponent, every single one except for just one county. New York 26 was essentially designed to be an unquestionably Republican district. It was redistricted by the state legislature in Albany about a decade ago, specifically to make it safe for Republicans. It has 30,000 more registered Republicans than registered Democrats. New York is a blue state, but New York 26, this one district, is decidedly not a blue district. When John Kerry beat George W. Bush in New York State by 19 points in 2004, Kerry still lost New York 26 by double digits. When Barack Obama beat John McCain in New York State by 25 points in 2008, Barack Obama still lost New York 26. When that district's longtime powerful Republican Congressman Tom Reynolds retired in 2008, he handed the seat off to a Republican businessman who was thought to be able to hold on to that as long as he wanted it. New York 26 is just that kind of district. In 2010, that Republican congressman won that district by a 48-point margin. Not that he got 48% of the vote. There were 48 points between him and the Democrat. But then this happened. Oh, yeah. A 48-point margin is nothing compared to an embarrassing flexing shirtless photo on Gawker.com. And so Republican Congressman Christopher Lee of the legendary New York 26, of New York's 26th district, 3 months ago today, resigned in the quickest political scandal of the year so far. 2 weeks from tomorrow, there will be a special election in New York 26 to replace the shirtless Christopher Lee. And in this reddest of red districts, with a built-in cushion of 30,000 Republican votes, the Republican nominee, universally described as a well-liked state legislator with no scandals to her name, shirtless or otherwise, she really ought to be a shoo-in here. The race is a statistical tie. What? Yes, a seat that has been Republican for nearly 2 decades. A district that is not only red, but deep red and designed to be that way. A district designed to be impenetrably red is now producing polling results like this. It's a poll out today from Public Policy Polling. It shows the Democrat in this race, Kathy Hochul, leading by 4 points. The margin of error in this poll is 3 points. The poll shows her up by 4. Previously, the biggest poll in this race had been the one by Siena College 2 weeks ago. That showed the Republican, Jane Corwin, up by 5 points, but with a 4.5-point margin of error. That miniature lead, it appears, at least from the new public policy polling data out today, it appears that Republican lead has been erased. How did this happen? How did this get so close? How on earth the Democrats even have a shot at contesting this House seat? How is this possible? Democrats have a shot at even being in the running for taking this red seat because of the 2 ginormous fire-breathing problems that the Republican Party has this year. I mean, other than having no conceivable presidential candidate. They will get one of those eventually. But they've got these 2 other problems regardless of their presidential candidate. Number 1 is that there is a schism in their party. Every time the Republican establishment picks a candidate, some local guy in a 3-corner hat starts getting funded by some out-of-state conservative billionaire or PR firm somewhere as a Tea Party challenger to the Republican establishment. You may remember the other big New York State special election. Remember the place where Republicans had held that seat since the Civil War? That seat went Democratic because there was a Tea Party challenger who split the right-wing vote. That was New York 23. There was some of that going on in this race, too. A lavishly self-financed, self-proclaimed Tea Party candidate is draining some support from the Republican candidacy. That is undoubtedly helping the Democrats' chances here. That is one of the Republican Party's challenges. I think that's sort of the story of 2010 more than it is the story of 2011. But honestly, that problem does persist for Republicans, and it is playing a factor in this race. But the other factor that seems to be the main thing that is driving this race, the main thing that is driving this most unexpectedly pro-Democratic outcome in upstate New York, the thing that is starting to get this race national coverage, the thing that sent Speaker of the House John Boehner, the highest-ranking Republican in the land, to this tiny rural district in New York today to try to save this supposedly super safe Republican seat. The other giant problem Republicans have in politics this year is Republican policy. Part of designing a seat to be a safe Republican seat is drawing your district lines in such a way that you make sure you include a lot of older voters in the district. There are 30,000 more registered Republicans in New York 26, yes. But a naked majority of all the voters in that district are over the age of 45. And this year, that's not a good thing for Republicans. The Republican candidate in this race, no matter who likes her or how much they like her, no matter how much support she's getting from John Boehner or from anybody else, she, like all other Republicans right now, was backed into saying that she supports the Paul Ryan thing. She supports the House Republican plan to kill Medicare. And so, kersplat. Jane Corwin, the Republican in this race, said she would vote for the Paul Ryan budget to kill Medicare. And the Democrat in this race will not shut up about it. I should say, will not stop talking about it. Will not let the Republican get away from it. That's a nicer way to say it. That's what I meant.
Jane Corwin said she would vote for the 2012 Republican budget that would essentially end Medicare. Seniors would have to pay $6,400 more for the same coverage. But the plan Jane Corwin supports would cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans. The budget would overwhelmingly benefit the rich. Kathy Hochul says cut the deficit, but do it the right way. Protect Medicare. And no more tax breaks for multimillionaires.
Even though this is supposedly one of the safest of the safe Republican districts, voters in this district, like voters across the country, really do not like the House Republican idea of killing Medicare.
Listen, we've got 2 weeks to go. 2 weeks where we've got to win this race. And I'll forget about all the polls because polls have never elected anyone.
You're going to hear a lot of that forget about all the polls talk from John Boehner this year and I'm guessing next year. Because a vote to kill Medicare is not the kind of thing that anybody is ever going to let Republicans forget in politics. And the Republicans are starting to figure that out, but they're figuring it out belatedly. They're figuring it out after they took that vote on it. Girl. One of the things that went largely unnoticed last week as the nation was riveted to the story of Osama bin Laden's demise was that John Boehner and the House Republicans dropped their plan to kill Medicare. That means they are apparently going to stop defending it. They're going to stop pushing for it. They're going to stop trying to fix the very desperately broken messaging on it. But again, here's the problem, Mr. Boehner. This is after they had almost every single House Republican vote to kill Medicare. And they had hapless Republican candidates like New York 26's Jane Corwin endorse the plan to kill Medicare. New York 26 is one of those places where even the most skilled Democratic politicians, working as hard as they possibly can, essentially have no chance of winning. New York 26 is the kind of place where becoming the Republican Party's nominee, even if you're Rick Lazio, becomes the same thing as winning the election. Now, the ongoing Tea Party schism within the Republican Party does still pose a challenge for Republicans. That will continue to be a challenge for them throughout this year and next. But the threat of somewhere like New York 26 going blue, that takes something bigger. That takes Republican political malpractice of stupendous magnitude. Democrats could never pull off something like this on their own. Only Republicans could put themselves in this position. You remember how Hillary Clinton had that book, It Takes a Village? In this case, this year, in what's supposed to be this deep red district, it does not take a village. It takes a Boehner. Joining us now is Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation magazine and an MSNBC contributor. Chris, it's good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Good to see you, too.
Is Kathy Hochul of New York 26 writing the Democratic Party their new playbook for the next election cycle?
Yeah, I think she is. I mean, it was such a miscalculation. It was such an overreach. It was so massively foolhardy and hubristic for them to do what they did, particularly when, as you and I spoke about on this very program, A, it was never going to get passed by the Senate. B, it was essentially a symbolic vote. And now that vote is there just rotting on their lawn. and they can't run away from the stench of it. So I think that and what's interesting to me about this race is there's two elements of this. There's the facts of what actually is going to drive the outcome if Hochul pulls this out. And part of it has to do with this somewhat nutty candidate, Jack Davis, who you mentioned. Part of it has to do with the fact that people are disgruntled with incumbents across the board. Approval ratings for congressional Republicans are bad, for the president is bad. They're not happy with anyone. So part of it is that. Part of it is how the election is interpreted in Washington. We saw this with Scott Brown, where the election was understood in the Beltway as a referendum on health care, and it almost killed off the chances of health care. This could be viewed, and you're already seeing political observers start to understand this, as a kind of referendum on the Ryan budget. And if it does that, it has a profound effect on the psychology of both parties going forward.
And what do you think about, substantively, what do you think about that political observation? I mean, what I was so struck by was the high number of older voters in this district. It's a raw majority of voters who are over the age of 45. We've got anecdotal evidence, of course, of older voters saying, generally I vote Republican, but I am not into what they are doing to Medicare, and so maybe I'll go Democratic on this one. Substantively, do you feel like that political observation about the importance of the Medicare vote is true?
I do. I basically think it's two things. I think you're exactly right. I think the Republicans thought, A, that they had seniors in their camp squarely enough they could pull this off. B, they overestimated just how much 2010 was a referendum. And C, they tried to be too clever by half in this completely disingenuous and craven way in which they carved out people over 55 in the Ryan budget so that their thought was they could go around to these districts and be like, don't worry, we're just screwing everyone younger than you. Don't worry about it. But it turns out you can't do that. It's just too clever by half. So I think that's part of it. But part of it also is that I think we can lose sight of this because we're focused on these kind of principled ideological aspects of an election. You know, the economy is still terrible, and people are still really unhappy with their representation generally. They're just really restless and disapproving of everyone they put in office. You have independents in this district in the PPP poll saying they want to see a Democrat by 49 to 43 or something. They want to see this representative be a Democrat. That's a massive swing from just a few months earlier. So part of that, yes, I think is a Ryan budget. Part of it is that the fact that the economy continues to be this just sort of open wound in the body politic that for some reason no one seems to be bringing themselves to address.
Briefly, Chris, I am stuck on my hypothesis about John Boehner being bad at his job, which I always feel bad about saying because I don't mean it that he's a bad person. I mean that he's bad at being speaker. Is there any way in which it makes political sense to have forced Republicans to vote to kill Medicare before abandoning the idea? Don't you say you're going to do it, not make anybody vote, and then let people take whatever position is convenient in their district?
Complete and total political malpractice. I mean, if you look back at healthcare, right? Healthcare, the Affordable Care Act was not that popular. It was not popular when it passed. And one of the things that people were saying after Scott Brown was, you've already voted for it. You are, if this is an unpopular bill, you have it in it's going to be hung around your neck either way. So you might as well get universal health care out of it. And ultimately, thank God, that argument won the day. In this case, it never had a chance of passing. I honestly don't understand what they could have been thinking to make everybody in the caucus take that vote. It's really, really, every day that passes, it looks like a more and more foolish idea.
I will continue to ask Speaker Boehner if he would like to come on this program and discuss it with me, and then maybe we can get an explanation. In the meantime, we'll keep making stuff up. Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation magazine and MSNBC contributor. Chris, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rachel.